Welcome back to our channel, Luxe Luxury. We all sure did hear about Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk as the top richest people in America today. But have you ever wondered who the richest people are, all throughout the time in history? If you want to know more about it, then please keep on watching. Because for today's video, we are going to talk about the 5 richest person of all time. Number 5. John D. Rockefeller. Well, we all know that Jeff is considered as the wealthiest American today because of his total cash assets of $400 billion. But truth be told, he's got a long way to go to beat the wealthiest American of all time, and one on the list is John D. Rockefeller. His name alone should be familiar, especially when talking about $1 billion money. And yes, he was an oil tycoon who had a fortune of around $400 billion. He was the founder of the Standard Oil Company in 1870, which began to skyrocket in value shortly after at one point in time. Standard Oil Company controlled 90% of the oil in the United States. As a result, his personal wealth became so enormous that his fortune was 2% of the national economy. With all those money accumulated, he lived an incredibly comfortable life. He owned houses across the United States. Did you catch in that news that he owned a 40-home room with views of New York City? What's more, the home took 6 years to complete and featured collections of Chinese ceramics in 28th century art. How crazy rich, right? However, the Kaikwit home was just the beginning. Later on, the home was set on an estate that came into be as the Polk Inteco Estate. Essentially, it is the estate that covered 3,510 acres and included 75 houses, 70 roads, and 9 whole reverse golf course, outdoor swimming pools, several tennis courts, a full-sized bowling alley, billiard halls, and its own farm and gardens. As to say, Rockefeller wasn't really well liked by the people, but he really did his part as he donated 10% of his income yearly to charity. It sounds inspiring, right? Number 4. Akbar. Akbar the First, a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, owned a massive empire in the 1500s, and he had quite a fortune. So surely, he deserves to be on this list, right? He had an estimated $500 billion. That's a lot of money already. Well, he had ruling and conquering in his blood. He worked hard from the moment he took the throne to conquer as much territory as possible, tripling it in his size. By the end of his rule, known as the Mughal Empire, his reign stretched across India all the way into northern Afghanistan. Additionally, he was also well versed when it comes to religious tolerance, and albeit his Muslim identity, many of his closest advisors as well as the city leaders were Hindu. What's even more interesting is how he took an active role in uniting the two religions and allowing individuals the freedom to choose. He also served his purpose by helping translate Hindu literature. To add, he was also an active goer in the Hindu festivals. While his overall wealth is a bit private, people have always known him to be massive. After all, his empire controlled 25% of the world's GDP for years. If you doubt his wealth, then you might want to devour every corner in his palace, because it's full of exquisite carving, small paintings, and extremely rare furniture. Number 3. Augustus Caesar. I'm sure you've heard more about Julius Caesar than his heir Augustus Caesar. But surprise! He was also incredibly rich. In fact, he was the only confirmed trillionaire of all times. He acquired a fifth of the wealth of the Roman Empire, which accounted for 30% of the world's GDP. During that time, most experts agreed that his fortune had already grown into about $4.3 trillion. Aside from his wealth, his position as emperor brought much of his fortune. Not to mention the inheritance he got, which was 75% of Julius Caesar's wealth. While Julius Caesar's net worth was unknown, we all know that he left 300 sesterces to every Roman citizen upon his death. And at that time, 300 sesterces were worth for months' wages, and that barely put a dent in his finances. So, I guess we can imagine how much money he left for his heir. But all in all, it wasn't just Julius who gave Augustus money. In fact, several wealthy families would entrust their estate to him, hoping it would bring political safety to their own children. Additionally, in the span of his 40-year affluent reign, he was able to double the size of the Roman Empire. He also founded a standing army, police, and fire services, a courier system, and roads, effectively bringing Rome into the modern age. Have you ever heard of an estate called the House of Augustus? Well, he lived in that palace for almost his whole life. The place has entire rooms dedicated to art and weapons. Every floor was covered in expensive touches of mosaics, and frescoes were sent to cover every wall. A very expensive house, right? Before Augustus died, one of his last words were, "I found Rome of clay, I leave it to you of marble." And true enough, his rule secured peace and prosperity that lasted for over 200 years. Number 2. Emperor Zhong. The runner-up for this list, despite his mysterious facade, is no other than Emperor Zhong of Zhong. He reigned from 1067 to 1085. Conveniently, this was an extremely affluent and prosperous era of China. In fact, they were the top makers of bronze ware in the world. They also granted the farmers the rights to own their own property, and in return, the production of rice skyrocketed and became a staple of the economy, making them a commercial superpower in addition to this gunpowder. The industry of printing and magnetic compasses was also invented during this time. The Song dynasty was able to pioneer in the world's first paper money and also form the world's first navy. And so, the navy allowed them to defend their trade routes, which protected their products with all its innovation. Interestingly, he was also in control of the 30% of the global GDP. With such a highly concentralized economy, he had incredible control over the money. To add, his wealth has been called immeasurable by experts. While no one knows the exact amount of his total net worth, it is for sure at least trillions of dollars. For the record, his wealth is often attributed to the fact that he formed an increased tax collection hundreds of years ahead of European governments. But despite his overwhelmingly massive wealth, he was known for being a fairly giving and a generous person. 1. He was known as a forerunner of the modern welfare. And 2. His systems and policies actively improved those situations of the unemployed, homeless, and the peasants. Number 1. Manzo Musa. And finally, we've reached the top on this list. Well, you might ask yourself, who is this person? I know his name doesn't sound familiar to most of you, but perhaps after you listen to his story in this video, his name will become a name that you will never forget. Manzo Musa's so extravagant and massive money made it impossible for modern historians to fathom how much he truly had. He rode across Africa on zebras, carrying thousands of pounds of gold, and that was just the equivalent of spare change to him. Can you imagine? For starters, Manzo Musa was the ruler of the Mali Empire in the early 1300s. His coronation happened when his predecessor went missing trying to find the end of the Atlantic Ocean. Unfortunately, his predecessor wasn't even able to witness Manzo Musa's rule, as well as the wealth and comfortable life he should have experienced. In the past, Europe was struggling with things like the Great Famine, Civil War, and a fun little thing called Black Death brought all the kingdoms of Europe to great suffering. But Manzo Musa was such a good leader, he was able to achieve the title the world's largest producers of gold and salt for his empire. And mind you, gold and salt were the two most important products at the time. He also conquered 24 cities and their surrounding districts within the first few years of his rule. Despite all of that, he remained distant from the rest of the world. He was so mysterious that even in Egypt, in the Middle East, so little was known about him. However, things changed when Manzo Musa began his journey to Mecca as a Muslim. As we all know, the pilgrimage is an important part of the Muslim religion. But when you have Manzo Musa's great wealth, you don't exactly have to rough through it. In fact, his voyage to Mecca covered 4,000 miles, and he was accompanied by a lot of people. He brought tens of thousands of soldiers, slaves, and heralds. Every single person wore Persian silk and carried gold staffs. The camels and horses carried hundreds of pounds of gold. There were at least 80 camels that carried between 50 to 300 pounds each. What an expensive trip, right? As he journeyed through Africa, he was a spectacle for all to see. He was often seen being frivolous in cities and even gave gold as gifts. When the news of him going to Cairo El Nasir spread, the Sultan ordered him to visit his palace. At first, Manzo Musa refused, but he ended up agreeing anyway. He offered him lodging for the night. The time he spent in Cairo was a very unforgettable event, especially to the locals. How could they? When Manzo Musa covered the streets in gold and the people were basking in the fortune he had given them. But the after effect of this grand generosity resulted to a depreciated value of metal, and it would take 12 years for the city of Cairo, Medina, and Mecca to financially recover. Well, isn't that a bit ironic? Moreover, Manzo Musa was said to have funded a mosque being built every single Friday in Cairo. When he fled back to Mecca, he focused to his religion and studies even more. He also worked on building palaces, mosques, and universities throughout his empire. In fact, he created Sankor Madrasa, a leading center and university. The saddest part is, after Manzo Musa's death, the empire of Mali began to fall a constant civil war. It weakened the country, and shortly after, the whole empire was doomed forever. Well, there you have it, the 5 richest person of all time. What do you think about the list? Do you think these people deserve more recognition? Who among this top 5 list, in your opinion, is the most admirable? How do you think they accumulated such big amount of money? Do you think it would be possible for them to accumulate such amount of money if they didn't have political influences? Let me know in the comment section below. Share your thoughts and connect with us. This is the Luxe Luxury channel. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And turn on the notification bell for more upcoming luxurious videos.